Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. And we are here to talk about the CARES Act today. This is another installment of our Taking Church Online webinar series, partnership between Church IT Network and MinistryPlatform. So hopefully you guys have found value from the topics we've covered over the past couple weeks as we are in this kind of new uncharted territory of navigating the COVID pandemic and how that impacts church. We've talked about taking our services online, taking prayer online, groups, classes, finances and giving. And then this week we were talking specifically about the CARES Act. After our webinar 2 weeks ago about giving and finances, we noticed that this was a big topic that came up of people having lots of follow-up questions about this, and so we felt like it was definitely worth a deeper dive. So we have gathered an awesome panel of people to help answer some of those questions and hopefully help you figure out how the CARES Act impacts your church, what questions to be asking, what things to be thinking about in order to leverage it to help your church navigate through this challenging season. So I am joined by Chris Cahias, our CEO here at MinistryPlatform. Our cohorts at Church IT Network were not able to host with us today, but we are still appreciative of their partnership and working in these webinar series with us. So Chris will be taking point here as host in just a moment after I finish going through our usual housekeeping agenda. So as always, we are recording and we will send out a link to the video as soon as it is available. Also on our website, along with the recording of this and all the other webinars in this series, we have been posting all of the resources that are mentioned. So any resources that are mentioned by our panelists, Trace is doing a fabulous job keeping track of all of those and getting those on the knowledge base with the webinar recording so that it's not just a chance to rewatch the video, but it also can be an awesome resource for you. And we hope that that is valuable and can be shared with other people in your community as well. As always, we'll be monitoring the questions in the question chat, so don't hesitate to let us know if there's anything you have questions on, if you want them to repeat something or clarification on something, and we will try to get those out as we go through. As I mentioned, please share this with your network. Use the hashtag #TakingChurchOnline and share these resources. That's why we're doing this. We want to resource the church, the Big C church, no matter what church management software you use. We want this to be a resource for you in this season. Okay, Chris, I'll hand it off to you.
All right, let's do some quick intros and dive right into this very complicated and interesting topic. So first up, we've got David Thurman, co-founder and CEO at Mortarstone. Dave, good to see you. I haven't seen you in a couple of years.
Yeah, it's been a while. I think we were in Southern California last time we were together. So it's great to be a part of the panel and looking forward to offering any insights that might be beneficial for our church partners.
Awesome. Glad you're here with us today. Next up, we've got Dennis Moses, who is not on camera with us, but he will be the voice, the booming voice from above. So Dennis is CEO of Church Capital Resources. Dennis, how's it going today?
Oh, it's going great, Chris. Thanks for having me today.
Awesome. Glad that you're here and glad for anything you're going to be able to share. Next up, we've got Stephen Goodspeed from the Church Lawyers. Stephen, you clearly, you've got a sign above your head, man.
Shameless plug.
Shameless plug. Glad that you're joining us.
It's and
then rounding out the list, we've got Mr. Glenn Wood. Can I introduce you the same way as I did last time? Mr. Excel Extraordinaire, and we'll say Church Conference Hopper Extraordinaire as well. So I'm just teasing. Glenn is with Seacoast Church. He's the church administrator, and yes, he is a well-known how to get the most out of Excel, even beyond what Microsoft designed it to do, and make your church go far. So, Glenn, we're glad you're here with us today, man.
Thank you for the opportunity. Love sharing.
Awesome. Well, let's dive right in. Let's talk about the CARES Act.
We're actually going to take a quick moment. That's okay. No, we're going to take a quick moment to do a poll just to kind of get a gauge of where everybody's at when it comes to the CARES Act. So you'll be seeing that go live on your screen here. Just let us know what your familiarity is with the CARES Act. And then we'll use that as our launching pad to start questions.
And Megan, it looks like we're already getting quite, like the Cliff Notes is the clear runner here. It's getting probably about 3/4 of the votes right now. Well, no, actually it just started to drop a little bit. We'll give you guys a second or two more, and then we will close the poll and show you the results. All right, I think we're done voting. So I'm gonna share the results on the screen so you guys can see it.
Awesome. Well, I think you guys have come to the right place. So with that in our back pocket, we will get rolling on questions.
All right, and as Megan said, if your question pops up during the midst of this, please go ahead and throw it in the questions panel, and we've got some folks who will be monitoring that and will interrupt us as we go. So let's dive right in. So who's eligible and how are we determining eligibility?
I'll jump in. I'll start with that one. Who's eligible? Probably the good answer is it depends on which version you want to talk about, because when they originally started this and they were talking about forming this, there was one set of criteria and it's kind of evolved. I think the answer right now is all churches are eligible, whether you have a 501c3 designation or not, as long as you have less than 500 employees. That's kind of from the nonprofit world. That's kind of who the act is targeted to be geared towards.
All right. Any other commentary there? That kind of makes it pretty clear cut. Churches with less than 500 employees. Cha-ching. All right. That'll be most of them. All right. So next one's up. What is the allowable use of the proceeds from the CARES Act?
It's basically trying to look at payroll costs that are, up to 100,000, I guess, basically. And there's mortgage, interest, rent, utilities, refinancing an economic injury disaster loan. So it's basically wanting to try to incentivize some employers to keep their employees. You can have up to a maximum, I think, of 25% of the total loan amount can go to other operational costs as well. And just a practice point, make sure you can trace that amount pretty well. Like some places are recommending opening up a separate account to put those funds in, just so you can trace and prove those, so you can try to get that thing to convert to a grant after 8 weeks, which I think is what a lot of people are trying to do.
Can we maybe pick up this question? Oh, go ahead, Dennis.
I was just going to say, don't forget the economic injury disaster loan, EIDL, that $10,000, if somebody borrowed that in January, can be added to the PPP loan.
Yep. And the
so
other,
you can actually do both as long as you're not using it for the same purpose.
Yep.
Got it. Can we pivot this on its head and maybe ask the question from the counterpoint? What are some things that are not allowed in the use of these proceeds? Are there any examples of those?
Any contract employees that you might have, people that you would pay on a 1099, those 1099 employees or people are not allowed, because they can actually file separately. That opened up last Friday for those people to participate. So again, you got to make sure that you don't include those funds in there. And then any employee who has a total compensation of over $100,000, the portion that is that they make over $100,000 is not allowed. It could not be used as part of the forgiveness to turn it into a grant. So again, there are some calculations that are going to have to be done on the church's side. You were talking about putting it in a separate account. I actually had a conversation with our banker this morning and said, that would be the preferable. He said, honestly, the challenge right now is getting a new account set up that quickly is not going to be something that is going to be easy to do. And so he said, you may just have to try and find depending on what your accounting system is, how you can track those funds and flag them and handle them accordingly. Because he said, honestly, for us, we aren't going to be able to get a new account set up quick enough for you all to be able to get it all done and process it that way. He said, in a perfect world, that would be great. But we're not in that perfect world right now.
One other one is the compensation for any employee whose principal place of residence is outside the United States.
Yeah.
So that would mean if you're paying missionaries directly, that would be potentially precluded from the use of these funds.
That's the way I'm reading the law.
Okay, that's
I defer
important point.
to Stephen on that.
No, you're right. Yeah.
No, that's great. That's good distinctions. Go ahead, Megan.
I'm gonna interrupt with a question from the audience here, just because it's a good time to ask it. You're talking about payroll costs. Oh, does housing allowance included in that, or how is housing allowance defined for that?
Stephen, you want to jump on that one? Otherwise,
I will, but you probably will have. We have been finding that we don't have any statutory certainty or other guidance that's perfectly on point with that, unless I'm behind on how this thing is. It's sort of evolving pretty quickly. We find it on a lender by lender basis. We're having some seem to be allowing it and others aren't, but I don't know that there's any definitive guidance on that. I've got clients that have experiences of both.
I will give you a little bit of kind of, for lack of better, inside information. Senator Tim Scott, who was one of the people that helped craft this through the SBA with Marco Rubio and the others, actually is an attender of Seacoast and has been for, I'll say 25 plus years or 20 years, 25 years that I know of. Great guy. He's done a phenomenal job of helping to walk through this. If you talk to him, his understanding was that housing was not going to be part of those calculations. But I'll also tell you, having talked with administrators from across the country, Stephen, you're exactly right. It is a lender by lender decision. Some lenders are saying yes, some lenders are saying no. For churches that have lenders that say no, they go, that's fine. I'd rather have X rather than 100% of X. And so they're just basically taking on a case by case. So it seems to be a lender decision, not an SBA decision. But if you talk to Tim Scott from what was the intent when they wrote it, the intent was it was not going to be included.
Any other questions, Megan, from the crowd?
I think we're good to move on. We have some more coming in, but I know some of them are already in the queue, so we'll keep on rolling.
Perfect. All right. I'm sorry, guys, that it's rapid fire today, but we'll keep it going here. So what is the interest rate and term associated with this SBA loan?
It's based on it's a 2-year loan at 1% interest. So if you're calculating that based off of the qualifications, the formula, that would just simply be a 1%, and it's no collateral because the SBA is collateralizing it. So, and there's no personal guarantees for this loan.
There aren't any prepayment penalties either. So again, I think some churches have talked about getting their money, working through the 8 weeks, doing the calculations, and then trying to get whatever is left paid back early, which they could, or they could wait. But there is not a prepayment penalty in there at all. Now I believe that there are discussions to being able to defer those payments for up to 6 months. And I think I think that was the final decision. Again, this section in here has been bounced around. At one point it started at 5%, then it was 0%, then it was 0.5%, now it's 1%. So, again, I think the final one, as you're saying here, is 1% for 2 years.
That's for the PPP. That economic injury one's a little bit higher. I think at 3.75 for businesses, and I think a percentage less for nonprofits with a 1-year deferral. So.
All right, good stuff. Let's keep going. I think Dennis just answered this one with no collateral required, but any other commentary on the collateral?
I don't on the collateral, but I do think on the initial eligibility, I think it is important to the extent that we might have church clients with separate organizations that are maybe a school or a daycare, there was some really good guidance that was given on April 3rd by SBA that sort of helped with the affiliation question, and really gave a lot of latitude to churches potentially to be able to treat those as separate organizations, and that can be important for planning purposes and trying to account for payroll and trying to you know, have a little more flexibility maybe in how you handle employment decisions and that kind of thing. The SBA gave a in the addendum on the document, which we're making available to the listeners, but they give you actually form language to use that says if the affiliation is based on religious reasons, or at least not purely non-religious reasons, you can put this statement in there, and it forbids banks or the SBA from inquiring on that. And so you can, you know, you've got a good case to treat those entities separately.
Nice. That's a big deal. Several of our, I know many of the churches out there have affiliate, you know, subledgers and other things that they're using for everything, like you said, from schools to even some of them their own missions agencies. So that's fantastic. All right. I think we answered this one too. Personal guarantees required. Dennis like knocked out 3 questions in the span of 1 sentence. Like, Dennis, way to go, man.
Oh, man.
The only thing I didn't add to that is there is no recourse to any individuals unless the loan funds are used for unauthorized purposes. So it's a non-recourse loan.
Got it.
As well.
All right.
I will actually say this. One of the other things that I've heard is that you can do this through just about any. I mean, there are a lot of lenders out there, a lot of banks that are doing it. A lot of banks do SBA loans. There have been, I think I've seen more positive reactions in terms of people getting them submitted and approved and paid and funded when they're going to smaller banks versus larger ones. I know several large national banks have had some challenges kind of getting their ducks lined up and getting their programs up and running. So I think, talking to a lot of administrators and XPs around the country, smaller banks actually have been more responsive and been able to, turn these things quicker and get them handled and, getting them funded. The earliest I think I heard somebody actually get funded was last Wednesday, and heard a lot of them, a number of them got funded on Friday, and some of them got funded yesterday. So again, they seem to be smaller banks that are doing that versus larger ones. I don't know if anybody else has any experience with that or not.
Same.
That's true, because SBA and the government has come out, the Treasury has come out and allowed non-SBA 7A lenders to participate. They have to, make qualification application with the SBA, but they're opening that up. But, just to give some perspective to the SBA, normally, let's say last year did 60,000 loans worth $30 billion. As of to date, they're going to be handling about $120 billion in a month. So banks right now are just swamped with the PPP loans. I know of one bank that's got 70,000, and they're doing about 200 and 225 a day.
Wow. Thanks. That's going to take a while.
So get your paperwork in sooner than later. All right. So probably the question that I think most people are curious about with regards to this loan, is it true that we won't have to pay back these loans?
I don't know who wants to try to
I would say,
first.
Who wants to put
I would
their
say that
name
would be
on
a
this
maybe.
one?
If it's used for the purpose, 75% for employee and the other items, the other 25%, then it would become a grant. But if there's, if it's not used for that, then it would result in a loan.
I I think there's also some requirements about maintaining headcount as well as compensation levels that needs to be addressed as well. So in other words,
That's right.
you can't fire low-income people and give out raises to other people without having that, in essence, become a loan versus it being a grant. So there's some nuances there that still have to be addressed.
Good point.
There are, and you know, in terms of rating it also, if you have some people, if you have some staff that do get furloughed or are laid off on the short term, as long as they seem to be rehired by the end of June, and your headcount remains the same over the criteria, over the reference periods, then the government is looking at them as if they never were let go. So again, there is some flexibility, but there are some criteria that you've got to make sure you meet and need to, you know, churches just need to look at it, read it, understand it, talk to an employment attorney if, you know, if they have questions, just to try and make sure that they're handling it correctly and going from there. I think, you know, I think the goal of this is that you know, the majority of it all is be able to be turned into a grant, and that there will be, you know, little or none that would need to be repaid. I know as Seacoast, we're working through the numbers, and I don't think, you know, we're a larger church, but still, I don't think we're dramatically different in terms of percentages than a lot of churches. And I think the majority of it does appear that it will turn into a grant. We probably will have a little bit left that will have to be repaid, and there again, just address it at the time. And part of the reason that you may end up being short is just as a point of clarification, the reference period in terms of the amount that you can get, that you can receive as a loan, the initial loan is 2.5 times your average monthly payroll costs, with few exceptions. And yet the repayment period that you have to pay back on is basically only 2 months long. So you've got a half a month mismatch in there. And there again, that's why they're also allowing rent and utilities and interest only on mortgages, not the principal payment, but just the interest portion of it. So again, there is a little bit of a mismatch, but I think the goal, you know, of the program is to try and get it out there so that the majority of it can be turned into a grant and you know, resolved you know, within that 2-month time frame.
And that falls into the spirit of what they're trying to do. In essence, they've kind of forced shutdown, right, of our economy. And so really what the stimulus is, you know, the spirit of the stimulus is to say, hey, we realize we shut you down, here's some money to get back at it, type of thing. And so that's, as you kind of look through that lens, it makes sense what they're trying to do.
All right. Do we have any audience questions yet, Megan?
I think we're going to cover some of these, so I'm going to let us keep going on our planned questions, but we will circle back in a little bit if needed.
Let's keep going. So this is one that I find very interesting personally, but will any of the churches be sacrificing any autonomy or First Amendment or statutory rights if it requests and receives this SBA loan or the PPP loan?
No, they won't be, basically, is the answer. Question 4 on the SBA document that was released on April 3rd sort of helped to quash this. And I had spoken to this a few times nationally before that. It was pretty clear with the First Amendment, actually, and even looking at just sort of the legislative history, Senator Scott and others, and some of the other executive orders even, and Hosanna Tabor, Supreme Court, and even some of that. But now you've got SBA on the document on record that no, you're not, and you don't need to post the you know, I always hedge a little bit. You know, you if you've got a for-profit business, you've got to continue to operate under for-profit, you know, sort of guidelines and that kind of thing, including the discrimination rules and employment and all of that. But you're not going to be compelled to, you know, submit your doctrinal beliefs on in favoring employment of people who favor your religious beliefs and all the things that churches do merely by engaging in this loan grant regime. And they had a pretty thorough analysis of that, and that document will be made available, I know, to the attenders today. So there's more that could be said about that, but that's sort of a thumbnail sketch. that.
Again, I think this is, this question has kind of been bouncing around the nonprofit world for years. I've been doing this for 25 years, and invariably when something comes up, people say, well, is the government going to be able to tell us what we can or can't do if we participate in this program? I don't think this one's any different. I think the SBA document did a great job, as you said. And I've been on a number of webinars, and all of them seem to say the same thing. And it's nice that the SBA did clarify that and put that out in writing. So again, I know for our trustees, we provided that to them because that was a question that some of them had. It's what are we giving up? And, so rather than just saying, well, Glenn thinks this, or here's what he's understood, this is an SBA document that says, here's in black and white, here's the concept, here's what we think, and citing statutes and rules that are out there. So I think they did a really good job, as you noted, of being able to talk about that and dispel that concern.
That's great. That's really great.
And just to let everybody know, this document that they're referencing, we have it on the knowledge base already, where we're going to put the recording of this webinar, and then also Trace can add it to the chat as well.
Awesome. So can churches participate even if they have not received their own tax exempt letter from the IRS?
Yes.
Yes, they can. Again, it's in that same document, also references and talks about that you don't have to have a 501c3 letter in order to participate.
And that may raise a good point about the even the churches never have to have any sort of tax exempt determination from the IRS to be tax exempt because of the First Amendment, separation of church and state. So churches are operating as a church, are automatically tax exempt. And the form, for this, the application form, is not, they have not had time to gear the application to nonprofits. And so you're going to see like 7 questions that are geared towards owners of small businesses. I say it's the Small Business Administration, not the Small Church Administration. And so don't be too cute by half when you're going through the questions and you see, well, this is for owners. I'm not going to tell them we don't have any owners, so I'm not going to answer the question about whether we've had anyone commit fraud, abuse, or any of that stuff. What they're asking you is, have any of the main principles, and we would say your board of directors and your officers, basically, and not just your chairman of the board. We saw an application that was rejected for that. You should probably list your whole board and your officers, and then answer hopefully no, and that you complied with those things. But don't be too overly precise with it. They haven't had time to carefully calibrate the application form just yet. I just wanted to make that point.
No, that's great. I really appreciate that kind of feedback. All right. And I think we've already answered this one, but we'll kind of get some parting comments on, can a church apply for both the Paycheck Protection Program and the Economic Injury Disaster Loan? I think we already heard a resounding yes, but go ahead, Steve.
Well, it's SBA question 1, and you can do both. How about that? Yeah. That's pretty brief for an interview.
Well, that was easy. All right, Megan, what do we got from the audience?
Awesome, yeah. One question is just, what is the risk or is there a risk if the SBA loan would not convert to a grant? What would, I know we've mentioned a few things, but maybe in summary of kind of what are those summary bullet points of how to make sure that converts to a grant?
I think they're talking about as long as it's used for the allowed use of the specified use, 75% of that money gets used for payroll expenses. The rest of it can be used for the other things that are noted. Again, as long as it's used for the intent of it, the idea is that the majority of that money will be converting to a grant and then forgivable. So again, the thought would be very little of it would have to be repaid or once the program ends.
Awesome, thank you. And then a question, we had mentioned head count a couple times as far as needing to try to keep your head count good. Just a clarification. So Jay-Z is asking this question, and it's, I know, a very common scenario for most churches of we have childcare workers who work, 3-5 hours a week. And now that we don't have women's Bible study on Thursdays, or we don't have something on Sunday afternoon, we aren't paying those super part-time workers anything right now. Does the church need to continue paying them in order to keep their head count, or if they bring them back after this is over, does that count, or kind of how do we handle these super duper part-time people?
Yeah, that's difficult. I think the ones that are really working sporadically, you don't need to be counted unless their services are needed during the time period where it's applicable. But it's and if you've got separate entities, you can look at that affiliation language to try to help kind of separate out some of them. But without that, I think you're looking at February 15th, I believe, look back period. And so if they haven't done anything since then, and they're not going to be needed throughout the loan, I think you can make the determination that they're not presently counted, but others may have other thoughts about that as well.
Well, wouldn't this potentially also be covered by what we talked about earlier with them being 1099? I mean, I know my church uses child care workers, but they're all pretty much 1099 employees.
And there again, that's probably a whole nother seminar of our child care workers 1099s, or are they employees? That's a whole nother discussion. I would say as the church administrator, we treat them as employees based on all the IRS rules that are out there. Everything that we've read is that they are employees. They're not 1099s. Musicians also fall into that same category. Musicians are employees. They're not 1099s. There are churches that treat them as such. Personally, I don't think that's the way that the intent of the law reads, but for us, they should be employees.
Got it.
I'll resist saying too much on that.
Again, that's a whole other webinar if you want to do that one.
I wasn't trying to open up another can of worms. I
was gonna
apologize.
say that does sound like a whole nother topic. Awesome, thank you.
I will
Okay.
say if there are no other questions, just a couple other comments I have. But go ahead if there are other questions.
Go ahead with your comments. We'll wait for any questions to come in.
Yep.
Okay. One of them has to do with deferral of Social Security taxes. Is part of this is, again, this gets into, there's a section of it that you can defer part of your Social Security taxes, but if churches elect to accept the PPP loan, they are not eligible to defer their Social Security taxes. So again, those are some of the nuances that you need to be aware of, and just think through and kind of decide what makes the most sense for you and your church. So there's that. I don't know, Stephen, anybody, do you have any other? Again, that's a bigger one. I'm just trying to condense it down.
It is. No, I think you did a great job with that.
Yeah. Okay. A couple other things is that for the calendar year 2020, as part of the CARES Act, is that even if you do not itemize your expenses when you do your taxes for 2020, you are allowed to contribute up to $300 to a charitable organization and include that with your on your taxes. So again, there is a benefit that I think churches need to communicate to their donors that's out there. And then there are also some additional contribution allowances that are available for business owners, so that they can contribute more and more to a nonprofit organization, charitable organization. Doesn't have to be a church. We prefer it all be churches, but doesn't have to be. But there are some additional contribution allowances for only the calendar year 2020. So again, I think as churches especially get closer towards the end of the year, something that is always good to talk to their donors about, make them aware of, because again, I don't, as individual donors to churches, I don't know that they necessarily have listened to all the CARES Act conversations and may or may not have heard that. But I think it is something that for churches and nonprofits, it is something that is good to talk to your donors about, is that they may have an opportunity to contribute even if they're not itemizing their deductions.
Yeah, that's a good point, Glenn. There's elements of the act that actually get into the excuse me, the generosity discussion as it relates to taxes. And what Glenn you're talking about is that above the line deduction where you can take a $300 deduction even if you are not itemizing. There's also changes in here for the 2020 year that affect required minimum distributions from IRAs. So if you have a demographic of people that are, over a certain age, there's been lots of changes with the Secure Act that recently came out, as well as now the overlap of the CARE Act. And so there's some things that play into elements that might affect generosity as it relates to your charitable deductions limitation, as well as required distributions from qualified plans. So there's lots of elements that play into the CARES Act outside of just as an employer that should be communicated also to your donors, as Glenn was mentioning.
Yep. Another question that I hear from time to time is if your church has to lay off some employees due to this, a decrease in giving and inability to be able to pay them, are they eligible for unemployment benefits? And I think the general answer, everything is yes, although some of this depends on state by state unemployment. Stephen, you may be able to talk more into that. But I think the answer for a lot of the country is yes.
It is, and that's one of the criteria for the federal unemployment too. One of them is if you don't have availability in your state even, but I think to administer it practically, I think that's right. But generally the answer is yes, they ought to be encouraged to try to apply and see if they can get it for sure.
Yeah.
And this is, go ahead.
I was gonna say they may be able to make more, on the short term, through that versus what the church might be able to afford for them.
That's right. This is a little bit slightly outside the lane of CARES Act, but it's in line with the main thrust of what we're discussing, which is trying to get help, for our churches, ministries, and our employees. But there are employee disaster relief fund payments that employers, churches, in this case, can make to employees subject to certain conditions, and they can be tax-free payments. And COVID-19 has been flagged by the IRS as a disaster with respect to that. And so with the appropriate policy and forms, that's another opportunity that churches do have if they want to kind of go down that road a little bit as well. I just wanted to point that out.
That's a disaster in all 50 states too, which historically that's never happened. So pretty unique.
Yep.
Yeah.
All great points. Thank you. Another question that's come in is if a church doesn't use the whole 2.5 times payroll within the 8-week period, plus their other expenses, will what has been paid out be forgiven and the remainder has to be paid back, or will the entire loan have to be paid back? How does that work?
Whatever applicable portion, of their payroll and the other expenses qualify, that portion of that would be forgiven, and then the only thing they would be expected to repay would be the difference between those two amounts.
Great, thank you. Okay, any other questions from the community as we wrap up here?
Or do any of our panelists have any like final thoughts? Because you guys, some of your own insights and your additional commentary has just been fantastic today.
Yes.
I don't really, but I appreciate you all very much. This is a great ministry that you guys are giving to everyone, and hopefully helpful.
Yeah.
I'd agree. I would, I think a lot of times especially, and again, I'll talk as an administrator or the XP, is that a lot of times we feel like we're the only ones that are affected or affected as much as, no other church in America is having the issues we are. And I think the reality is we're all facing the same things. Now we can talk about, is you giving down 5% or is it down 20% or whatever it is, but we're all in this together and we're all facing it. And sometimes just the ability to reach out and talk to somebody about it and realize that, that I'm dealing with it maybe a little differently than you are and sometimes just communicating with somebody is good to do. I connect with administrators across the country, and if somebody has a question outside of this and they want to call me, they're certainly welcome to. My information is out there available. I'm glad to take an email or my cell number. You're welcome to call me. Glad to try and help any way I can, because again, we are all in this together, and we will get through it together, and church will reopen at some point. We just don't know when that's going to be, but we will all get through this together, and God is still God, and he still is in control. And we just have to try and administrate this and do the best job we can with all the information that we've been given. And there is a ton of information out there on the CARES Act. There have been some great webinars that have done. ECFA's done one. Frank Somerville's done some. Mike Batts has done. So again, there are a number of them that have had a lot of information out there. So if you want to dive deeper into it, I think there are a number of places that you can get as much information, and probably more information that you had than you ever wanted to know about the CARES Act. It is available. And some of it gets really geeky. Yeah.
And wash your hands.
And we'll certainly try to go drum up some of those and get them in the links. Trace does a fantastic job of curating all that. So Glenn, if you have any links that you think would be, or actually anybody on the panel today, links to any podcasts or materials that you think would be, valuable, we would love to post them alongside this video for everyone, just to make it easy.
I'll send you some links when we get off.
Same.
Fantastic.
Hey, Chris, I have some good news that I found out today, that one thing that will help a lot of banks, some of the bigger banks especially, is that on last Tuesday, the Federal Reserve announced its intent to create a secondary market for these PPP loans and relax the regulations on bank leverage ratios. And that has been some of the two larger banks that put a $10 billion cap on how many PPP loans they would do, was because they didn't think they could sell them. And with the Fed stepping in and becoming a lender, which is one of the first times in our history of the country to do so, plus the fact that that bill that the president wants passed, that extra $250 billion, is coming up for a vote this coming Thursday. So I think there's more money for those churches that got a late start, or I know some of the frustration that churches had is they went to their bank, and the bank, said, hey, if you don't have an account with us, or if you don't have a loan, because there's been a couple of overlapping federal statutes and regulations for banks, and they didn't know which one to follow. So it all came out so quickly that they just caught them by surprise. But I think those things are significant in being able to provide more money to more churches.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for all that. We are going to wrap up here. As we've done with our other Taking Church online webinars, we have been doing a drawing for a random winner for Starbucks, because coffee makes things better some days. So thank you
They're
to
still
Debbie
open in Florida. I'm just saying.
Well, drive-through. You need that drive-through. Thank you, Debbie, for joining us today, and we will get a Starbucks gift card sent out to you. And also, if you are still listening, you can win too. So post your top takeaway from today, something you learned, something that you're going to go take action on, an aha moment. Post it on social media with the hashtag Taking Church Online, and the first 3 people who do that will also win a Starbucks gift card. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for, like I said, spreading these resources to the Big C Church. I wanted to shout amen as Glenn was giving his little motivational pep talk at the end there, because that's so true. We're in this together. It is easy to think, oh, I'm the only one that's experiencing this, whether it's personally or for your church community, and this is an opportunity where we can truly say, no, we are all experiencing this, and we are in this together, and God is still God. Amen, amen. So thank you so much for joining us. Do know that we are praying for you individually, as well as for your churches through this season, and we we will, like Glenn said, we will get through this, and this is not forever. So we pray that these are resources that can help you through this challenging season. A huge thank you to our panelists. Thank you for your time and sharing your insights and experience with us. And especially as this is something that is evolving so quickly, I know it's very helpful to get as much information out there as we can. Chris, would you mind wrapping us in prayer today?
I'd love to. Heavenly Father, thank you so much thank you for putting brilliant people around us. Thank you for all of these guys for their different facets, from lawyers to generosity to executive pastors. Thank you that they have had the time to dig in and understand this and gain some wisdom that hopefully can be imparted on churches far and wide. And we just pray for our churches right now, just as Megan said, that we can all get through this together and come out on the other side. Lord, I just pray that in the midst of this, it may seem like the end of the world, but I think we all know deep down inside somewhere, you're at work even in the middle of this. You're doing something new and fresh in the church, and I don't want to claim to know what it is, but I'm excited to be along for the ride. So Lord, thank you that there was technology. Thank you that there is technology. Thank you that these loans and programs are coming along and will hopefully keep the churches across the U.S. open. We just pray for open doors for you to continue doing the work you do, and that's saving souls. So we love and praise you, Lord. Thanks again for these guys and for this time together. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you for the opportunity.
You bet. Thank you so
blessed,
much,
guys.
Yes, we don't have any additional Taking Church online webinars scheduled at this moment, but if there is a topic that we haven't covered that you feel would be beneficial, please do let us know, and we can see if we can make something happen. So thank you again so much for your time, and we will talk to you later.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.